Hi, welcome to Tiny Teacup Reads. Thank you for being here. So somehow February is already over, which means that it is time for a monthly reading wrap-up. I read 13 books in the month of February, which I'm very happy with, especially since there were a lot here that I really enjoyed. There's several 5 stars. The first book that I finished in February was The Story Collector by Evie Gohan. This is a book that I stumbled across on Kindle and I thought sounded interesting because I'm always a fan of historical fiction. It was a bit of a letdown though. I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and if I'm being honest, that was probably too generous. This book is split across 2 timelines. One is set in the modern day, where a woman named Sarah from America has a slight mental breakdown after her divorce and moves to Ireland on a whim, where she finds a 100-year-old diary hidden in a tree. The other timeline are those diary entries where an 18-year-old named Anna meets an American who has come to Ireland to study fairies and fairy sightings. She becomes his assistant, offering to travel with him, introduce him to the locals, and to translate for him. I found the second timeline set in the past to be vastly more interesting than the modern one. To be honest, I just did not find myself caring about Sarah or her problems, and I kind of just speed read through her parts, hoping to get back to the diary entries as quickly as possible. I think if the entire book had been from Anna's perspective, it would have been a lot more engaging. The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden was the next book that I read. It is a historical fiction set in Russia with fantasy elements. It spans several years and follows a girl named Vasilisa as she grows up. She is different from a young age, speaking to the household spirits that everybody honors but nobody else can see. When her father goes to Moscow, he returns with a new wife, who forbids the worshipping of these spirits and has an intense dislike for Vasilisa. Things begin to go wrong in the village. The crops start to fail, and the creatures in the forest nearby begin to creep ever closer, and it is up to Vasilisa to use her unusual gifts to save all of those she cares about. This was a 4-star read for me. I really enjoyed it. I love a good parallel between a hero and a villain, and this really interesting plot where both of them are fully convinced that their actions will save everyone and the actions of the other person will destroy everything really had a lot of great tension. The setting was really engaging too. The pacing wasn't always perfect. I felt there were a few parts that dragged a little bit. There were also 2 characters that I really enjoyed that seemed to be set up for a really interesting plot, but then they both moved away and just kind of never showed up again, which I thought was disappointing. But this is a trilogy, so maybe they come back in the sequels. Then I read my first 5-star read of the year, which is The Rise and Fall of Dinosaurs by Steve Brusatte. I read another book by him last year called The Rise and Reign of Mammals, and I absolutely loved it, so I had to read this one too. If you're like me and the last time you learned anything about dinosaurs was when you were about 10 in school, then this could also be a really interesting read for you. It turns out there have been a lot of scientific discoveries since then, and the author has a wonderful way of explaining pretty scientific things in a fairly simple language that is pretty hard to do, so I'm impressed by how easy this was to read. So this book never gets too complicated, but it also never talks down to the reader either. My only complaint is that it was only 400 pages. I would have loved to read a version that was 4 times as long. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde was a reread for me. Wilde is one of my favorite classic authors and has never let me down. The titular character of Dorian Gray is a beautiful young man who sells his soul for eternal youth and beauty. Meanwhile, a portrait of him takes on all of his signs of aging, as well as the signs of his decadence and corruption throughout the years. There were a few too many monologues, but other than that, a very quick and interesting read, 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Art of Inheriting Secrets by Barbara O'Neill. Olivia is a food editor in America when her mother dies, and she learns that not only has she inherited an ancient English estate, but also a title that goes with it. Once she gets to the derelict mansion and starts to uncover its secrets, she begins to understand why her mother never mentioned any of this to her. This was a pretty good book. The plot and the characters are all pretty solid. It just somehow never really managed to completely grip me, so it was a 3 out of 5 stars. Then I finally read a book that has been on my Goodreads TBR for over a decade, but I just never got around to. This is Room by Emma Donoghue. This is a story about a mother and her 5-year-old son, Jack, who are held captive in a single room. It is told from the perspective of Jack, who has no idea that there is any kind of life outside of this room. He is pretty happy with the life that he has, but then his mother tells him about the outside world and formulates an escape plan for the both of them. It is not easy to accurately capture the voice of a 5-year-old, so having the story be told by Jack is a really risky choice, but one that really paid off. There is a heartbreaking juxtaposition between how Jack sees the world and describes it to us and how we understand it through his descriptions. To him, his life is completely normal, but we as the readers understand just how hard his mother works to keep him happy and safe and healthy. This was absolutely a 5-star read for me. Not only are the plot and the writing really well done, but the characters absolutely drew me in. Check the content warnings if you're going to be reading this one, but if you can stomach it, I highly recommend it. After that, I really needed a palate cleanser, so I reread The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. This is a middle grade book, and it is the first in a series called Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I know for a lot of people this was a childhood favorite and they have a lot of nostalgia for it. Personally, I had aged out of that age bracket when it came out, but I still love Greek mythology, which is why I really wanted to read this. And I have to say, it really does hold up even when you read it as an adult. It is so much fun. It has great characters, a very engaging plot, and it also never treats its young characters or its young readers like they're stupid either. This series is about Percy Jackson, who discovers that he is the son of a Greek god, and all of the adventures that he gets up to with his friends. I think for any 10 to 14-year-olds, this would be an absolutely perfect read, and I enjoyed it as an adult, so I give it 5 out of 5 stars. And Then There Were None is an all-time favorite read by an all-time favorite author. I've read this at least 5 times, and it's still always a 5-star read for me, even though I know how it's going to end, or maybe even because of it. 10 people arrive on an island, and over the next few days, all of them die with no obvious clue as to who did it. Agatha Christie does a really amazing job of capturing the feeling of being trapped on this island, knowing that one of these people is the killer and not knowing who it is, but knowing that you're going to be next soon. The many multiple characters and their perspectives does get a little bit confusing at times, but that is my only issue with this book. It is still a 5 out of 5 stars. The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar was a reread for me. It is a contemporary romance about 2 teenage girls who run competing henna businesses for a school project. Nishat is from Bangladesh but lives in Dublin, so it centers a lot on her experiences as an immigrant as well as her Muslim family struggling to accept her sexuality. The plot and the writing is pretty simple, but if you want a cute book with a happy ending, give this one a go. 3.5 stars. I'm not a huge audiobook person in general, but I did listen to the next book rather than reading it. I was doing some cooking and cleaning and wanted to be entertained, so I listened to The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Goodreads tells me I've read this before, but it was 10 years ago, so I have zero memory of this book. This is one of the earliest science fiction books about an alien invasion, and it cannot be overstated how much of an effect this book has had on every alien invasion story since then. Usually when I listen to audiobooks, I struggle to stay focused and often zone out, but this was action-packed enough to keep my interest. It is an interesting book in itself, but I thought it was especially cool to see the early examples of the tropes that we find in alien invasion stories even now. I give it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book. Oh, I have some conflicting feelings about this one. Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart. It was good. It was very well written. But when I finished it, I wish that I hadn't read it. It is about Mungo, who is 15 and lives in Glasgow. He is also a Protestant who falls in love with a Catholic boy, which is pretty much a worst-case scenario. I thought this would be a cute romance about 2 people from opposite sides falling for each other despite their differences. But this book was very depressing. This poor kid does not get a single break throughout the 400 pages. Things just keep going from bad to worse. And part of it was my fault for not checking the content warnings carefully enough before picking this up. But you know, you can write books about depressing and shocking topics in a way that leaves the reader with a little bit of hope at the end, and this left me with no hope. And at a certain point, it kind of felt like the author was just sadistically enjoying putting this character through all of the worst things that humanity has to offer. Again, beautifully written though, so I give it 4 out of 5 stars because of that. But if you're going to read it, do make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. So after that, I reread Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston because this was exactly the queer enemies to lovers romance that I wanted to read. It is about the son of the American president who begins a secret tryst with the Prince of England. Yes, the plot is like something straight out of Wattpad, but it is funny, it is sweet, it is cute, and has characters that you root for, and it made me happy to read it. I also gave this 4 out of 5 stars, like the second one, but this one did not leave me staring blankly at a wall for about an hour after I was done. Lastly, I read The Copper Beech by Maeve Binchy. I was staying at my parents' house and had a bit of a route around my mother's bookshelves and stumbled across this one. This is set in a tiny village in Ireland in the 1950s and 60s and tells the story of several different characters in that village. It reads kind of like an anthology. Each of the characters gets their own chapter and the plots don't connect too much. There's also no big ending where everything comes together. So if you like your books to have a big overarching plot, this might not be for you. But it really drew me in and has some interesting characters, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. And that's it. That's all the books that I read in February. Have you read any of these? And what are the books that you are planning to read in March? Leave me a comment because I would love to see. That's it from me. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope that I will see you in the next video. Bye!